Welcome to our panelists and welcome everybody that joined us today to talk about candidate experience and company culture. I'll be a proud moderator for this panel. I'm Natalia Panowicz, CEO at Codility. And I wanted to thank our partners, Goodtime and Recruitee, with whom we were co-organizing this webinar and this panel. So a little bit of housekeeping before we introduce the panel and we start the discussion. Please be, to our dear audience, please be very active. Ask us, shoot questions at us. I'll make sure that that I serve it to our panelists. You have a lot of functionalities here on Hopin where you can interact with one another. You can send us a question through. You go to stage and then you click on Q&A and we'll see all those questions there. Let us know where you're based today, where you're calling from, where you're joining us from, and anything else that we can do to make this panel a great experience for you. And off we go. Dear panel, please introduce yourselves. What's your name? What's your role? Which company you are currently with? And why do you care about candidate experience for starters? Perhaps with Oana.
Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. And thank you, Natalia, for the invite. And thank you for the work on these events. I see they're picking up, and it's great to be somehow a thought leadership in the industry. I think we needed this in the virtual environment where we're missing the conferences. Great to be here with Ahryun and Adriana. My name is Juanio De Quesco. I currently live in Berlin, and I'm head of TA Talent Tech for Wayfair. I joined Wayfair almost 6 months ago. I think it's actually now leading in. So if my colleagues are here today and if I say something weird because I'm too new still, just pick it in the chat. But I'm super, super excited to be here. And in brief, why I care, it's, customer focus, right? The employees and candidates are our focus for TA. So definitely without that, we won't necessarily do what we do well. So I'm super excited to be here, super excited to understand how everybody else views this from their perspectives. And I'm happy to have Goodtime and Publicis here as well.
Welcome.
My name is Adriana, one of the co-founders and CEO of Goodtime. I'm based in San Francisco. The reason why I care about candidate experience, it's everything that Oana said. Plus, now that, post-COVID world, everything's completely virtual, things that we have known and we are so used to are being completely redefined. I think this is the time that's actually really exciting for all of us to really put our thought leadership together and really make the candidate experience even better in the virtual world. That's why I think I care a lot about candidate experience and really happy to be here with fellow talent leaders.
Thank you so much and welcome.
Hi, everyone. Well, first of all, welcome and thank you, Natalia, for putting this together. Such an important topic, especially in the time that we're in now. My name is Adriana Soundara. I am currently leading the management consulting practice globally for Publicis.Sapient. I've been at Publicis for about 8 years now in different functions, and I'm really excited to talk about this because it is at the core of what we do. It is the essence of, I think, the quality that we can deliver as individuals, as professionals, and as organizations to the candidates that we're servicing. So it's a great topic.
Super, and welcome. All right, so to set the stage, how do you define candidate experience? What are the boundaries of candidate experience for you? Where does it start? Where does it end? So that we actually scope the topic of our webinar well for starters.
I can give it a shot. Just because we were having this conversation last week, we were looking into some defining the journey, right? The candidate experience is not one single experience, it's the total of interactions and its effects longer term on your brand, on that result of the interaction. Is it an interview? Is it an offer? Is it an event? Is it a roundtable? What is it, right? So all these milestones within the candidate journey are part of what we, let's say, call holistically in the industry candidate experience, but I think it's so much more than that. And I want to maybe, I don't know if I'm setting the bar too high, but when we were discussing this actually with the team last week, we're like, it's not just one linear the person considers a potential employer and exits at some point, where offer or rejection or anything like that. There's the employee journey that you're actually sometimes also internal candidate. That's also candidate experience. You exit that organization and you become a candidate from somebody else. You have set that bar for the next experience that those candidates will expect to have in the industry. And if you want to make it super cyclical, they probably they have a chance to come back as candidates, even if they've been employees at some point. So it's a really large topic in a way, if you really sit down and think about all these milestones in the candidate employee journey in the industry or in relationship with your organization. So I'm just putting it out there. For me, it's a really important topic, just because it covers so many aspects of how people flow through their careers and through a certain industry, right? And I'm sure everybody sees a bit this. If you want to break it down, it's actually a bigger story than just one interaction or one interview or one process, right?
I think to piggyback off that, I think that the candidate experience does flow through. It is very cyclical, but it also doesn't end or stop at a certain point through that phase or that transaction, that experience, because once you convert from candidate to new hire, it doesn't stop there, because then there's the onboarding experience and the experience to really embed the individual into the organization, into the culture, into the, the whole operation of what they're essentially joining, right? So I think we call it candidate experience because at the onset they are candidates, but through and through, they either will be hired and become new hires to our organizations, where there's a journey there that we have to be very mindful of. Or if they're not hired into the organization, they are potential contacts, or they are potential relationships that we should continue to build on and foster, because opportunities continue to arise and change evolves, regardless of the industry or the organization. Change and transformation evolve, and those are relationships. They're not, it doesn't stop at the decision process.
Can you hear me?
You're so breaking fast, unfortunately.
Oh, shoot. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I think candidate experience, I think, is really interaction with your company brand. Also, it's the experience that the candidates really want to have, right? I think we kind of try to look at it from candidates' perspective. And I think candidates want the interview or the hiring process to be efficient, equitable, and also personalized. They don't want to feel like it's just a piece of paper, their resume in a huge stack of, paper. They want to feel like they matter to the company. So yeah, efficiency-wise, you want to remove all friction in the process and streamline the process with technology. Equitable means, you really want to showcase that it matters to the company, that the E&I, as well as removing unconscious bias in the process, is important, and really showcasing that kind of materially to the candidates. That I think kind of defines what positive candidate experience is. And then lastly, personalized, with the automation and technology. The time that your recruiting team gets back, you want to spend the time personalizing the experience for each and every candidate, and make sure that you're spending, meaningful time with each and every candidate, so their experience is more human and more personalized. That's how we see candidate experience, and that's why super excited to be here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much to all of you for sharing and for setting the stage for us. So I think I can, gathering all your thoughts together, I can say that it's actually a very broad domain. And I would say that in many cases, when we when we think about candidate experience, we might go a little bit more narrow, right? We would think, oh, so how was the experience of my candidates throughout the interviewing process, for example, right? Or how did they feel when we offered them or when we rejected them? But I really love that notion of broadening the scope of candidate experience and actually thinking that our employees where candidates will potentially be candidates for us as well. So it's actually something that touches many aspects of the company, and perhaps this is a good moment to introduce the notion of company culture. So how do you see company culture? I would say transpiring through candidate experience and through different stages of candidates interacting with you as an employer.
I think I can take a swing at that. I think if you put forward the interviewers and interviewer panel that really uphold your company culture, company values, and so on, I think kind of naturally that interaction throughout the interaction with the candidates and the interviewers, the values will probably show through actions. And then also things that the interviewers actually mention and so on. But I think to make it even more material and really obvious to the candidates, I think mentioning the values and also showing through an example in actions. For example, let's say transparency is one of the company values. Then when asked a hard question by the candidate, I think the interviewers can actually mention that, hey, we at this company care a lot about transparency. And then follow that with answering the question with utmost humility and transparency. That really shows through actions that it matters. That particular value really matters, and it matters and contributes to the culture there. So I think showing that through actions is really the best way to get the candidates engaged with the company values and really see in actions. Also, I think another thing is picking the culture agent to be part of the interviewing panel, and also kind of training the interviewers on how to showcase company culture and values, and making sure that they're doing a great job of it throughout the interview process and hiring process, and also casual interaction with candidates. I think that's also another way to showcase culture and values. And I think if you have good culture agents in the interview process, they will just naturally exhibit the values throughout the interview process. Mm-hmm. That's how we look at it.
Mm-hmm. So I tend to agree with that, because I think it's that's something. I mean, values are part of every company, right? And you either have them, when you walk in, you see them very clearly, advertised or all over the website. I mean, the branding is there, but it's more about the feeling the individual has as they're going through the process. And if the company's doing a good job, and the talent acquisition professionals are doing a good job of really ensuring that we're instilling those values, that you're steering very true to that as an organization, then it will be actions that show that. It really will be in the feel the candidate has throughout their conversations with different people. They'll just inherently come to the fact that, they feel you are an open culture, you are collaborative, you are, all these things, because they're feeling it, because they're experiencing it. And I have, candidates tell me all the time, especially, one of the things that Publicis.Sapient is, people really do enjoy our culture, our openness, our creativity, all that we kind of are as a company and organization is very visible to a candidate as they're coming through the process, because everything they're talking to is exhibiting those attributes of behavior. So I think it's, that's really action. That is shown through conversations and actions, and it should be very visible to that candidate as they're going through that process. Again, to Ahryun's point, if we're doing a good job of really demonstrating that and enforcing those values.
Thank you so much for this. I think in the meantime we temporarily lost Oana, so I hope that she will be able to return. Let's actually talk about bad candidate experience, and I think many of us either have those experiences personally, or we know somebody close to us that went through a bad experience of a recruitment process. I think it's really aggravated by a fact that looking for a job and changing jobs is actually a stressful event, right? We do it only a couple of times, typically a couple of times in our life. We really want to do well. It's a big decision. So there are many, many dreadful stories out there of that is not only not getting a job, but actually just not being treated well, or leaving with that's bad feeling after engaging with particular companies. So I know that there are. I think we could name a couple of things that are very obvious no-nos, right? For example. Hi, Oana. Welcome back. We're currently talking about bad candidate experience and obvious and non-obvious ways that actually make it negative for candidates. So on the obvious side, I would say very lengthy process, right? Everybody hates that. Being in recruitment process for more than a month, for example, it's really tiring. Being asked things that are not related to the job, where we can't find the connection between what we have to do in the process and what we would do on the job. That's also super frustrating for candidates. Big thing, being ghosted by recruiters, or being ghosted, even more so being ghosted after interviews, right? We join an interview, we talk with the company, and then we want to know how it went. And nobody calls back for weeks, for example, right? And then I think, should we call back? Should we ask them? Yeah, maybe it will be seen badly, like terrible experience. I think many people out there had that. So these are some of the obvious things. Other obvious and non-obvious things that would negatively affect candidate experience from your perspective.
I can jump in there. I mean, I think, one of the biggest things and one of the most important things as talent acquisition professionals that we have as a responsibility is ensuring that there is transparency at the very beginning of the process, right? And one thing is, ensuring that the candidate knows exactly what the experience will be like, ensuring that the candidate is aware of how many steps in the process, and if there will be gaps, if there will be a chance where, I'm not going to be able to get back to you for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or, we have to put a pause on things. Just being fully transparent goes a long way. And also really being able to be very clear about, some organizations I found have taken this approach of, we're not quite sure of the role, but let's have you have conversations and we'll try to see what the role is. That I think can backfire because when organizations start to do that, then you have a person that starts going through conversation after conversation, and it's not quite clear on what the direction is, not quite clear on what the role is. And then if there isn't any closure to that, then that can become obviously not so good of experience. So I would say transparency, full transparency and communication. And, that should ensure that takes care of that, even if there are delays, which can happen.
Just to add on that, I think the transparency also comes with having the chance to show yourself, right? Like, are you as a candidate seen throughout the process? And especially, we talk a lot about volume hiring or niche hiring, right? So a lot of people are recruiters are struggling on a day-to-day basis, to be honest, to make sure things are done correctly. And this is where tooling comes in, or best practices come in, or building a full-on community that takes care of it. But ultimately, a bad experience or a neutral experience can be equal for the company because they didn't manage, right, to get that person interested or pass the word, even if they didn't, achieve the outcome positive in the interview. But the word of mouth is still very powerful, right? So people being seen throughout the process, giving also even the ones who get feedback fast, and things moved timely, but if the feedback is not conclusive or constructive for them to say, I can do something with this feedback, I will reapply in 6 months because I understand what you're looking for, and I understand that you've seen my real gaps or my real opportunities, right? And I think this is sometimes forgotten somehow, because we think process versus human interaction. Ultimately, robots will not care about this, and they would be fine to just move through the process step by step. But I think the idea of being seen and being given the chance to showcase yourself will make a difference. And sometimes even that is just neutral effect sometimes, but it matters so much when it is happening.
Yeah, I totally second everything that Adriana and Oana said. I think transparency is super important, and lack thereof creates really bad candidate experience. Another thing that's not super obvious, but I think it matters quite a bit, is actually candidate experience with the interviewers. For example, like if interviewers, like certain busy interviewers end up doing like 20 interviews, let's say, per week. And interviewers, if you have like so many interviews happening, and especially if those are all strewn throughout the entire week, and you're like running from partnership meeting to an interview to executive meeting to customer meeting back to interview and so on, candidates can really see that interviewers are not focused on the conversation. And it that really creates the experience of, oh, am I just another person that they're talking to? Am I one of the many candidates? Whereas I think that's why what was really what's not obvious, but I think it became really obvious, is as much as candidate experience is very important, what generates that, it's actually interviewer experience also, so that they're not context switching so much to where it's so hard for them to focus on the interview, because their mind is so racing from different meetings that are happening throughout their week. So I think that was another thing, and obviously there are ways to fix that, like make sure that you have interview days, like each interviewer has Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. Those are your interview days, and you kind of create those chunks of interview time, and you can really 100% focus on interviews instead of running from one meeting to another, and so on. But I think that was another thing that was kind of not obvious, but it actually affects candidate experience quite a bit.
Thank you so much. And there are two things that I immediately would like to double click on. So let me first start with something that Oana mentioned, which is feedback and giving meaningful feedback. And I know that this is such a polarizing topic, especially in certain countries where there seems to be a fear of, for example, fear of litigation, right, or fear of doing something wrong with feedback. How to do it properly? Should we all do that? Should everybody receive feedback? And how to do it properly so that it actually is meaningful and it gives something back to the candidate?
Yeah, I'll put my perspective a bit on it. Of course, we're talking, let's say an interview happened, right? One interview or a panel or a process happened. But ultimately, if you do the right thing in your process, you shouldn't fear anything, right? Connecting to what Ahryun saying, educating your interviewers, it's so critical, right? Like making them understand the impact of, we've been through this many times, and probably me and Adriana the same, right? What can you write about? And now for example, we use Greenhouse as an ATS, and we have this inclusivity nudges, common sense sometimes, right? But they are making such a big difference when being prompted not to write about or ask or think about, right? Sex, age, nationality, things that could be used as discriminatory arguments, right? But even beyond that, if you think about how am I structuring my interview? Do I have a structured interview? First of all, I think that's the first step that everybody should do, considering the benefits of a structured interview, both for evidence gathering. Do we have the right signals for what we're interviewing? Have we done a proper calibration on this role, right? So we don't lead people around and saying it's not you, it's us kind of situation. People did put their time in that conversation. I think it's important. And then third, am I avoiding biases, right? Am I having the right people in the interviewing panel? Are they educated enough to make sure that they signal the right things? Usually it's the recruiter who passes on the feedback, right? So even that needs to be double translated sometimes, right? So this conversation can lose a lot throughout the different gateways that it passes. So just to wrap it up, sometimes like do the right thing. First of all, calibration, structured interview, understand your own biases, understand industry issues sometimes that can happen, right? And practice writing, get feedback on feedback, do it on yourself, right? How would this fall on me if I receive this piece of feedback, right? So there's a lot of dog fooding as well in this process of understanding what will make the difference into how this is perceived, received, and processed, right? Ultimately, we want people to learn something from the experience as much as we learn about the people in the process. It's not easy, right? Again, it's a lot of work that everybody needs to put in, not just talent acquisition as a function, but the entire organization, first of all, when defining roles, and then the interview. But yeah, very, very tough one.
I love the fact that that meaningful feedback actually doesn't start with taking the interview scorecard and serving it to a candidate over the phone or in writing, right? But it starts with making sure that what is in this scorecard is actually meaningful for starters, so that it's properly calibrated, it's properly assessed. We're relying on accurate signals to make a yes or no decision. I love this. So then practically, let's say that we've calibrated, we're happy with our interviewing process. We have structured interviewing process. We have interviewers leave feedback on time. Great. And I know that that's not always the case. We have sometimes some interviewers have to be chased, right? But let's say we have them very disciplined. They leave feedback. Who should do that? Should that be done by a recruiter? Should that be done by an interviewer, hiring manager, in writing, over a phone call? What are your convictions in this practical aspect of feedback?
I think so. I think first I wanted to point out one very important thing that you had actually mentioned, which is a lot of us do work in global areas where the candidate experience in one geography is very different from another geography for reasons that are just, inherent to that particular area, that particular culture, whatever it might be. So I think being very in tune as a talent acquisition professional to your audience, and then calibrating that or fine tuning that process to ensure that you're meeting those, those needs and those expectations of those individuals. So I think first that's important. I think second, it's also important to recognize the type of role, right? So if you're in a very technically oriented, driven talent acquisition, role, and you're bringing in, engineers and technologists, a lot of that can be most times very straightforward because you either have a certain technology or you don't. It's very easy for the candidate to understand, I need to learn this version of whatever it is, Java or .NET, whatever, right? But if you're looking at more of a role that is more business oriented and it may not be as straightforward, I think there needs to be some time and effort really put into those resources and tools that we develop throughout the process to calibrate that skill set. And then I think if those tools are effective, then as the candidate is going through that process, I feel the recruiter should have a conversation with them, certainly as a first touch point. But they already know going into that, hey, I went through that case and I recognize I didn't know this piece, right? So when you're going back to them and giving them information, it's not a surprise to them. They've experienced it, they felt it, but you have to do a very good job of making sure that tool, whether it's a case, whether it's attributes or competency review, is really honed in on those core skill sets and behaviors so the person has that clarity, that transparency coming back to them. That's been my experience, at least.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a lot to add here, but I think what I definitely see as more of like best practices is that usually recruiters share the feedback. If the candidates have come to maybe like the middle of the hiring process, but they have gone all the way towards to until the final interview, where they've actually spent some time preparing for the interview. They've met 5, 6, 7 different people. Then usually I think the best practice is that hiring manager reaches out and provide more meaningful feedback and more details behind the feedback also.
Thank you so much for sharing all that. Very great deep dive and a great double click collectively. So let's move on to the next one. So I'm actually very curious. How do you track candidate experience in your organizations? Is it surveys? Is it any other sentiment measurement? Yeah, different metrics that you would use to determine where you are with candidates at any given moment for any given role.
Yeah, I saw me and Adriana open together, but now she's leaving me in. It's a bit funny with this interaction, right? But at least everywhere I've been in, I guess it depends a little bit by size of the organization, maturity of the organization. But where I've been in, the candidate NPS is somehow the biggest signal. So the CNPS survey, you can have a different variant from Qualtrics. Like you can do it yourself. You can have a platform to gather. Depends again how mature I guess you are. But somehow that's interesting, right? That one, you have a certain response rate. So that's the idea. You get this a sample of the experiences, and we know, or at least we are told that, hey, most of the people doing the survey are people who want to tell you about their experience, and most of the people who want to tell you, they're the ones who have not so good an experience. How do you increase engagement? For us in general, in any organization I've been, again, it was equally important as to the feedback that we've got, right? So getting more and more feedback, increasing that sample size was critical to really understand what's happening macro, where are the real patterns and areas of opportunity. And yeah, this is kind of the how we measure it, and I'll let Adriana, maybe we can dive a little bit deeper into what matters in this area as well, because again, there's so much that you can do in a certain quarter or a certain year with this results, and I think it's a learning process for everybody.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's great, Oana. I think there are different mechanisms, so you're right. I've been with organizations that have a more structured, that have something that's more automated, others that is more one-to-one. So you can take and take the approach that best suits your organization and best suits what, ultimately you're trying to do. And also think about how you want to scale it, right? So, if you think about just executive hiring alone, an executive has a very different experience coming into an organization versus non-executive, or managerial versus non-managerial. So I think that one of the things that's important to know is ensuring you recognize the differences there, and you're able to tailor that. One approach doesn't necessarily fit all, but you can have an approach that you can tailor to certainly fit all, so you get the information that you need. So we do gather throughout the process, feedback. We have more formal surveys, we have more one-on-one, we have, once the candidate's onboarded, recruiter touch points. At that point it becomes more of a new hire touch point. But I think that you want to hone in on the experience. You want to hone in on everything from was it pleasant to, was it too long, was it too short, did you get enough information, like all of those kind of non-tangible things that are really critical to making that candidate experience a positive one, and things. But again, I just am very cognizant of knowing that one size doesn't necessarily fit all when it comes to this. I think you have to really know your audience and also tailor it accordingly.
Yeah, I think the ultimate testament to candidate experience, I think, is one of the metrics is probably offer acceptance rate, whether the candidates that you want to hire are accepting your offers. That's one. Another thing with NPS score. I think NPS score definitely is a very well-known and kind of quantitative way to measure that. Also, qualitative measure, we have found to be extremely useful. Is when we provide that feedback, giving that call to the candidate and providing that feedback, and in that on the same call, just asking like, what could we have done better to have made your experience better? I think even from the qualitative research, you get so much nuggets of gold from candidates that really care about your company brand and wanna help you improve the process. That's another way I think to continuously improve your candidate experience.
But I think what's important, you make a good point, Ahryun. What's important to note there is that I think the offer accept ratio certainly is telling, but I also think that there's a lot to learn from those candidates that are not accepting the offer because sometimes they have a great experience. And I always ask anyone who's not taking a role, understand, tell me a little bit more, right? Just to find out, was it truly something to do with the experience that impacted the ultimate decision? Or is it truly that it's just the role, right? Maybe they just want to do something different. Something else came along, but yet they love the organization and hey, let's talk in the future. That I think is extremely important to notate and not, I would say be careful on those declines because it doesn't always necessarily equate to, that quantitative data being negative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And indeed, the time that let's say that we agreed that we're giving meaningful feedback to candidates. I think it's also a great experience to ask for feedback back, right? So if we give it to every candidate that we interview, then suddenly we have such a great channel to candidates, and we can ask them, how was it for you? How was the experience for you? Anything that we can improve, and then we stop and listen. At least that's when I was still in the role of giving feedback to candidates. It worked fantastically for me in the past. So that's something that I would recommend to everybody. We will learn. Like it's possible to learn tons throughout that simple question. Okay. We actually have a lot of questions that we can cover in the Q&A, or a couple of great questions in the Q&A that I'd love us to cover. But before we go there, we talked about process. I feel like we talked about. I think this word didn't we didn't necessarily name it, but I think the undercurrent of what we're talking about is candidate empathy, I would say. That we really try to put ourselves in the shoes of the candidate and try to imagine how they feel interacting with our company, with our processes, with our interviewers, etc. So now let's go to the other side and let's look at tools and technology and anything that you're currently using or would like to try that from your perspective helps drive great candidate experience that is able to showcase your company culture in the best way.
When we were talking about the previous topic on how do we see sentiment, like how do we perceive some of this, I'm actually so curious on Goodtime side, right? Because I think there's so much data from how people interact with the tools part of our interview process, right? So for example, it's a coincidence that we're here in the same panel, but we do use at Wayfair Goodtime, and it has been such a massive improvement. And I won't hide the fact that one of the highest ranking points for our candidates when giving us feedback about the process is around scheduling. I've also I'm interviewing a lot of recruiters at the moment and recruitment managers, and their feedback in the process, right? You pick up a lot of the signals within the process. Like, I'm so excited you have a tool like this that can make me feel more in control, that makes me also think that your organization is forward thinking and invests in the right things for the right reasons. So just on this shift of adding more tools that are effective for candidate experience, everybody feels it. And it's such a relief, I would say, for TA functions in general. Because we've been through I've been in this industry for the past 10 years and I've seen so many things, and I don't think I've seen enough, to be honest. I think that the good stuff is actually yet to come from tooling perspective. But I think again, the ad hoc, the engagement that we see because we use the right tools is playing such a huge role. So thank you, Ahryun, for making this happen. And I'm super excited to hear some other, what everybody else is using and how are they seeing that effect.
Oh, thank you so much. So grateful to have you as one of our customers, and we totally love Wayfair. Our team absolutely raved about Wayfair team also. So thank you so much. Definitely, I'm biased. We definitely use Goodtime for all meetings, including interviews, and we try to make sure that our tool contributes to improving candidate experience, removing any friction in the interview process, and also interviewer training, as well as diversifying interviewers through attribute-based interview selection. But also, I think like Codility, for example, and I think tools like that really improve the equity in the process. Also, not only it helps with remote recruiting, but also that really helps with the equity within the process, because now it's not just your interviewer's impression of the candidates, but also it's become more quantifiable. It's more structured. It provides more data about the candidates. So I think it makes the process more equitable. So we do definitely value softwares like that. And then I think there's tools, and also there's processes that are really innovative. One of the processes that we were advocating for in partnership with iSIMS, for example, is continuous candidate experience. One of the questions that Natalia you asked was, how do we define candidate experience? It's not just the interview experience; it's a lot broader.
Mm-hmm.
So the process of continuous candidate experience actually means personal interactions between potential candidates and hiring managers before and after the hiring process, and doing that at scale. And also it could be hiring managers or your ERG members and so on. So your candidates or potential candidates continuously engage with your brand. That's another process that I think will really shape how talent acquisition will evolve in the future as well.
Thank you so much for sharing. So let's go to questions. And I think we lost Oana again, but hopefully she will be back again. First question. What are best practices in dealing with being the middle person in awkward situations where you need to go back and forth with a candidate about the role being open or closed or moving forward or not?
I can take a stab at this one. So depending on who's, I guess, the party that's asking the question, whether you're a hiring manager or whether you're in talent acquisition, it just happens to be in more of a third, kind of middleman role. I think it's important to first and foremost get full internal clarity. So you need to sit down with that stakeholder, whoever the stakeholder is, to identify exactly a time frame. We need to nail down a time frame, whether it's 2 weeks, whether it's 3 weeks, whether it's a month, but we need to go back to the candidate and let them know this is why and this is how long. In terms of getting that clarity, I think it should be something that's not that difficult, even if it's not the best news. Sharing some news is better than sharing no news 100% of the time, because at least the candidate knows where they stand, and they may say, you know what, that's okay if you're going to take another month or two because I'm not in a rush, or you know what, I'm really interested, so I'll wait to kind of see, please touch base with me again. But they're not waiting, to kind of find out what that looks like. So I think first and foremost is, if you are in a position of delivering information, you need to go back to your stakeholders and you need to get clarity on time frame, and at least at a minimum, a base communication that we can have, so we can have some closure. And then if we need to, then go back to revisit. So I think that stakeholder communication is absolutely 100% critical.
Oh yeah, I totally second everything that Adriana said. I think when in question, I think error on the side of transparency. So if the role is closed, without kind of unexpectedly and so on, I think just being super transparent and letting them know early so that they can move forward with other opportunities that they're interested in. So there's no blockage within their job searching process. I think that would probably go a long way.
Super. Thank you so much. Next question. How to approach the negative candidate feedback a company gets on Glassdoor? It's a powerful tool that impacts the decisions of potential candidates in the future. And I cannot agree more. So I'm meeting job candidates every single week, a couple every single week. And there's not a week when somebody does not mention our Glassdoor. So it's ubiquitous for sure. How do you approach negative candidate feedback?
You can't have the good without having the bad. So you need to treat it equally, right? If you're saying thank you for the good stuff, you should also say thank you for people actually had some, let's say, openness to put themselves out there. First of all, again, anonymous is anonymous, but ultimately there is a signal there, and you have a big responsibility when, maybe not having good things to say, but ultimately, just to give a practical example of being in an organization that wasn't, at some point in my history, wasn't viewed as top, let's say, in the market, or the experience was not great, and you need to switch that around. You want to, and you need to longer term, right? And I think if anybody in the audience finds themselves in this situation to really need to work those extra 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3 to get to the 4, or upwards. The best thing that we've done was actually to do a task force, or assign people accountable in the organization for regular feedback to immediately be responded to, but for things that are really needing of attention, executive attention, right? To have people in position of power to personally take the time and respond. It might seem much, especially for large organizations, but it's super, super helpful. And you wanna show improvement, right? Year after year, Glassdoor will stay. Those reviews will stay, and we know they're upvoted, right? So it's very important to adapt and to grow out of yourself somehow on the longer run, and really think long term. It's hard to receive harsh feedback, and again, those teams are working really hard most of the times, but taking the time to treat negative or critical feedback as important as the pat on the back will really actually make a difference longer term for your organization than the others.
I think it's important to as in your role as a talent acquisition professional, to be aware of what is out there. So go and look. You may be part of a very large organization that has multiple locations and geographies, and you're not going to know it all. But if you go and you at least are up to speed on what is being put out there, and you internally can educate yourself on perhaps some of the shortcomings or perhaps some of the areas where we're making improvements, you're A, not caught off guard, and you're B, prepared to have a very open, intelligent conversation in regards to easing that person's concerns for whatever they're bringing up. So I think education is key for the professional that's actually in charge of communicating with the candidate.
Yeah, again, totally second the other panelists. I think definitely there's positive feedback, negative feedback. Both are feedback is gift. And I think what really matters is what you do with that feedback. And if asked by candidates about the Glassdoor reviews, then just, again, kind of err on the side of transparency and said, hey, everything's kind of iteration. We are continuously iterating to make things better. And sometimes things fall through the cracks. And, as long as we're doing things to make things better in the future and being really transparent about that if a really bad experience actually happened, then just admitting to the fact that, we as an organization, we kind of messed up, or we had some loose ends. We are now fully aware of that, and we have implemented XYZ to make things better in the future, and being really transparent about that and humble about the fact that things are not perfect. I think that will go a long way with candidates.
All right. Similarly difficult question or a difficult situation for which we let's give practical advice. how much information should you share with the candidate during the rejection process, especially if it's a rejection due to culture misalignment?
That's a very good question. Thank you very much for who put it there. I personally have a big problem with this idea of you were not cultural fit. If anybody still uses this phrase today, and I know we are in the industry, that again, we're coming back to that idea of structured interview and breaking down what does culture mean for you. Why is that person not deserving at that point in time? Again, everything is time related. To join the ranks, although they showed interest, right? And I think we owe people to look inside and not brush off things that we are not able to articulate. We should be able to articulate. And for example, I'll just use an example of we have one of the values is respect others. And I've seen this also in other organizations where people were rejected saying, hey, maybe it's not really a cultural fit for ABC not being very straightforward, but ultimately if you correlate that to a behavior that employee should express or should showcase right off the bat, right? There are maybe other things that people can learn, but what is your expected behavior at entry point, and articulate why in the interview setting that was not checked, right, in any shape or form. And have a conversation, right? Sometimes, again, I think Adriana was making a very important point. There are some roles where we can say yes or no because we have functional skills that we make this selection against. But then we have behavioral attitudes, things that are, they actually make the companies function as they function beyond the functional, beyond the functional skills, right? But we owe it to ourselves first to articulate what does that mean? What's that expectation when we come in? And yes, I think be brave, whoever asked the question, to try and articulate that with the hiring managers. I think it's ultimately important.
And I think Oana makes a really good point. That comes down to, that is essentially your debrief call. As a recruitment professional, your responsibility is to have a debrief with those individuals that have interviewed this candidate to fully understand the reason why we would not be moving forward. In order to do that, it's on the recruiter's really responsibility. If you don't feel comfortable that you're getting enough information or that it is directly tied to behaviors and attributes and competencies around the role, then you need to push and you need to best understand. And we as talent acquisition professionals need to, we can't take that for an answer, right? It is just what it is, not a fit anymore. That doesn't work. Why, right? Let's understand. Is it because you're feeling that, they didn't have enough experience working in a team-based environment? Is that why you're saying that? Okay, we can directly correlate that to this position requires teamwork and demonstrated success working in teams. But that falls on, again, into that talent acquisition pool of professionals that you really need to, it's an art. Debriefing is an art. As a recruiter, you need to have that talent to be able to push back and ask those hard questions sometimes and challenge these interviewers in a way where if it is a good time, that's okay. We just need to understand why, right? We just need to, and have very concrete examples and answers solidified that we can, in the most proactive manner, relay that information onto a candidate in the best way possible, correlating it all back to qualification and skill set required. It all should go back to that. So that's kind of my golden rule when it comes to that.
Yeah, totally. But just to add, it's not easy, right? I think we expect so much. You have, I don't know, a recruiter 1 year in discussing with the director, and the director makes a remark like, oh, he or she is too introverted for my team at the moment. Like things that are, let's say, some things are easy to debunk and some are not, because again, cultures and backgrounds and expectations. So if you are to invest in your own communication, negotiation, influencing skills, do it early. It will take away the fear, and it will take away, I would say, the anxiety coming to standing up, or at least asking some extra details from very senior people who make the organization. And I understand where this might come from sometimes, but it is, I think, we can be the gate openers instead of the gatekeepers more than that. So invest in that part as early as possible. Yeah.
It comes down to that training, right? Making sure that that recruiters are well prepared to handle those conversations, because there's going to be a lot. It's a fantastic field because it throws you things every day that is just unexpected, but at the same time, that can be a challenge. And I think if you have the proper training, to Oana's point, then you're well prepared to go into those conversations.
Okay. So I think thank you so much for sharing all that you shared. And I love the fact that we were able to go very practically as well and advise with, you shared advice that comes from years of experience that you have driving candidate experience and driving great talent acquisition processes out there. Closing thought from each one of you, as an answer to a question that we had in the beginning of the panel. So what your candidate experience says about your company culture?
I mean, closing, I think it is the key ingredient really to your success. It's the key ingredient to your success as an organization, for candidates and for employees and potential employees. So I see it as a relationship. Really, that's what we are. We're relationship builders, drivers. So it's an essential ingredient that you have to get right if you want to have long-term success.
Thank you.
Long-term success, I like that. Just to add, I think for Wayfair in general, and I'll put myself maybe in the same pot, this ability to adapt and grow and really aim at building the best team. And again, iterative, right? Everything changes. Your candidate becomes your employee becomes a candidate again, and so on, right? So really understanding the times we're in, the expectations of the market, the generational differences. I think this, for Wayfair, this ability to adapt and grow and really looking at how to build the best team within certain times and certain priorities boils down to the candidate experience as well. And I'm happy to see somehow that the same innovative mindset, the same kind of long-term thinking is expressed on a day-to-day basis also in how we strategize around candidate experience and interview process in general.
Thank you.
Yeah, for us, actually, recently we hired an engineer who was actually once rejected by us 2 years ago, and we provided feedback. It was technical feedback, and he actually worked on that feedback. It actually stuck with him. He worked on the feedback for the following 2 years, and he came back, applied again, and he's like one of the best engineers ever. We're so happy to have him as part of the Goodtime family, and I think kind of thinking of candidate experience from the perspective of treating every single candidate as if he or she will become your future coworker at one point in the future. I think that really changes how you think about candidate experience. So that will be my last thought there.
Thank you so much. And it's a great thought to conclude today. Thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you so much to our participants, and also again to our partners that made this webinar possible. And I look forward to more.